that quote, it's like the revolution starts at home, right? Like everything that we do, the personal is political, right? How you raise your little one, the values that you instill, the conversations that you have, what you model, right? Emotional regulation, like all of that contributes to the larger movement. And so in some ways, like going out in the streets and doing all of that, that's one aspect of it. But I think that now I'm finding myself being more introspective of like, what does it look like in the everyday life?
Yo soy la madre, I'm the creator. Yo soy la reina, I am the maker. You can bow down now or bow down later. I don't need you to be my validator. I am the healer, la curandera. I'm starting fires, don't need madera. Deep as an ocean, light as a feather. Bring on the dragons, I am the slayer. Madre, madre, creator, I am madre.
I'm your host, Amber Ivana, and this is Mom's New Identity podcast. First, let me say I'm glad you're here. On this podcast, my goal is to help fellow mothers redefine motherhood on their terms. How would I do that, you ask? Great question. By having honest, vulnerable, and sometimes even uncomfortable conversations about parenting, motherhood, childhood trauma, and mental health. We do this so we can challenge the ideas of what society tells us we're supposed to be and do as mothers and as women. My hope is that when we as mothers begin to heal and be true to ourselves, we can begin thriving instead of just surviving.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Oh, I love that you have the podcast set up. It's perfect.
I didn't do any of this. I'm just a talent, but I'm like making sure it works. It works?
Yeah, no, it sounds great. It sounds great.
Okay.
Yeah. We're already recording, so
Oh, perfect.
no worries at all. But oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I'm like nervous, but I'm excited.
I'm so excited to connect with you. Like I've told you before, but your content, it gives me hope. Knowing that people like you are out there, it's just like I feel seen, you know?
Oh, thank you. You too. I remember the first thing that like caught my eye about your content. I think it was a trend where like you like slam the door on what people say.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, the boys will be boys and all that. Yeah.
And then I saw your page. I was like, oh, cool. They're like doing podcasting. And honestly, like seeing you guys like start your podcast and like listening to the episodes, it inspired me. I was like, yeah, you know what? I need to do this. I need to just jump on the train and like start my podcast. Yeah, for real. I don't know that you knew that. I don't think I ever told you.
No, I definitely didn't. I remember when I started following you in your bio on Instagram, it said future podcaster. And I was like, nice.
Yeah.
Nice. This person's gonna have a podcast. I'm excited.
Yeah. So thank you for that inspiration.
Wow, I'm honored.
To start a podcast. So that's why I was like, I gotta have her on. She's like day one supporter too, and fellow mom podcaster. So I was like, I gotta have her on. So
I'm honored.
But yeah, let's go ahead and introduce you in your bio. So Dayana is a first-time mom, fellow podcaster, content creator, activist, and educator. She is a first-gen Latina who is passionate about making an impact by changing the narrative, not only for her son, but for the youth in Central Los Angeles. Prior to becoming a mother, she was a community organizer who worked with high school students to challenge the systems and policies that have created a school-to-prison pipeline. A few years later, Dayana took to the classroom to become an educator as a means to continue the work she began as a community organizer, of course, in a different capacity. As of now, she has made the difficult decision to leave teaching, but is now redirecting that energy into spending more time at home with her son Ali, as she continues to grow her audience for her podcast with her husband, Paul, and her following on social media. Her podcast, Parenting Plus, like we were just talking about, started out as a fun way for her and her husband to reconnect during the postpartum period. However, it has quickly grown into both an honest and vulnerable yet fun and lighthearted show that discusses the realities of postpartum while sharing intriguing perspectives on some of the most popular and trending TV shows today.
Yeah. I sound so cool. You made me sound so cool.
No, but it's all true. Like it's literally everything that I put in there is all just facts. Absolutely correct. Nothing, added to that. That's it. That's all you, girl. That is all you.
That's right. I'm gonna own it. I'm gonna own it.
That's right. Give yourself a little pat on the back. Yeah, but I got to tell you too, when it comes to your podcast and the shows, every time you guys would talk about like different shows, I'm like, oh man, I gotta watch this show. Like, this is really interesting. I can't tell you how many shows you guys have put me onto, but at the same time, I don't have all like of the I don't have all of the subscription services. I just have like a Netflix and I think Prime and like Disney. But all the good ones that have the good shows are like HBO. Do you guys have Paramount?
Yes, we have everything. But listen, which ones of those do we pay for? Maybe like one or two. The rest are shared. They're shared from like family or like friends. So early on, we would say like thank you to some of our friends who are sponsoring this by letting us use their accounts
Yeah.
because it's unsustainable to have all those things. And I mean that's part of the strike right now. It's just like it's the business model is not sustainable to have all the channels and be able to see everything. It just isn't.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that strike is crazy. Like honestly, I didn't realize writers were that like underpaid. You would think
Right.
that because they're literally like they're part like these shows wouldn't exist without them. Like granted
Right.
the actors and everybody else plays a part in it, but like the writers play a really key part in these shows. And so the fact that they literally have to go on strike, like
What trips me out is like this is one of the most like lucrative industries, like the entertainment industry. Like if they are being feeling like they are facing oppression and inequality, like what is that to say for the rest of us in other fields? Like this is the
right.
field that has millions and billions of dollars and they can't even feel like they have adequate working conditions. That's what's scary to me, because it's like
Yes.
this is the industry that has bank. They have money.
Exactly. No, for sure. Like exactly what you just said. The fact that what does that mean for the rest of us? Like,
Right.
oh my gosh. It just get the other day I was talking with my husband about it and I was getting so like he's like, well, I'm like, I don't want to put him on blast. So like, it's just, my husband and I got to tell you, before like we became parents and COVID and everything like that, we were deep, deep, deep in the trenches of like multi-level marketing and like hustle culture. And let me tell you how classist and just like all of the things bigoted it was just awful and it's so like I'm almost like ashamed to admit that like I was part of that and I feel like part of me just like knew deep down like something's not right about this but they had me like so convinced that like oh I could have this amazing future and da 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 not even considering the fact that like a lot of what makes these people millionaires and billionaires comes at the expense of like hardworking innocent people you know? And so like now it's like I've quickly become radicalized since becoming I don't want to say radicalized. That's probably not a good word, but I've quickly gone to this point of like no, like the way this country works and capitalism and all this stuff it's like it's messed up. It's fucked up. Like it is
Yeah.
these systems in this country need to change and it took me becoming a mother and realizing how poorly mothers are treated in this country to recognize that and realize like oh my gosh like what the actual fuck.
Yeah.
So like when you told me all like when you sent me your bio about like the work that you were doing, even before, I was like, man, like I gotta get on her level. You know what I mean? Like for real. Like I gotta like step out more and be more of an activist. And it's hard, because I want to participate in all these protests, but it's like with my kids being so small, it's like, do I go out there? Like how do I get my kids involved in this process? And I feel like
Absolutely.
the best thing that you can do when your kids are so small is like teach them,
Yeah.
right? Like explain to them, like, hey, these systems and these beliefs and these things, these are not okay.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm not going to teach you to believe that if someone is working class or if they're poor, that they just need to work harder. Like
Right.
I'm
Right.
going to teach you, hey, what systems of government, what things are going on in this country that are causing so many people to be in that position
Right.
and like
And
challenge those things. Sorry, go ahead.
no, I was gonna say like I'm even though I've done all of that like in the past, I'm also struggling with what it looks like to transform those values into motherhood because I'm also even though that's a huge part of my background and my career and like my
Mhm.
passion, I'm also not like I'm not gonna take my little one out there. Like, like my thoughts have changed, my feelings, So everything you said, it's like when you hear that quote, it's like the revolution starts at home, right? Like everything that we do, the personal is political, right? How you raise your little one, the values that you instill, the conversations that you have, what you model, right? Emotional regulation, like all of that contributes to the larger movement. And so in some ways, like going out in the streets and doing all of that, that's one aspect of it. But I think that now I'm finding myself being more introspective of like, what does it look like in the everyday life to model that? And that's still a huge contribution. Like if you think about it, we're raising, you know, the little ones of the future of how are they going to, you know, live in this society and have their relationships. So I think that a lot of the times, I think as parents, we might think, oh, we're not doing enough, et cetera, but we're doing so much.
We really are. And like the way that this country operates makes it so much harder sometimes. But I love what you said. And I feel like it's a great segue to the opening question that I sent you. I don't know if you had some time. It's anytime I've asked somebody this question, like, wow, that's a really like loaded question.
It
But
is. It is.
How do you feel you're redefining what it means to be a mother?
Hi, friends. I hope that you're enjoying this episode with Dayana because I absolutely loved this conversation that we had. But I just wanted to take a minute out to remind you that if you really enjoy the show, if you're enjoying this episode, to be sure and leave a rating. You can leave a review if you have the time. Share it with friends or family or whoever you know needs to hear some of the messages on here. You can follow on social media to become part of the community at moms.new.identity. But if you have the means as well, you can support the show by giving a monthly gift of as little as $3. And you can set that up using the link in the show notes or YouTube description if you're watching this on YouTube. It's just, I believe, moms.new.identity.com/support. So any gift that you are able to contribute is very much appreciated, but know that it is not expected. And really the best way that you can help the show grow is to continue to share it on social media, share it with friends and family, talk about the podcast, leave a rating, leave a review so that Apple knows to show this to more people. So again, I thank you so much for your support and your continued support, and we'll get back into this episode with Dayana.
It is a very existential question. And honestly, the more I thought about it, I was like, I don't know if I have an answer. I really don't know if I have an answer, but I think that what I think about is that my constant reflection on that question is sort of the answer. Like I'm constantly thinking about like, how am I redefining what it means to be a mother and a parent? And I feel like I'm like an open book of existentialism because every so often I'm feeling like different things. Like one thing that comes up for me a lot, and you know, we are all multifaceted, but one thing that comes up for me a lot in terms of how I'm redefining motherhood is like, I have felt really called and inclined to like surrender to motherhood in a way, like not in a bad way, but just like letting myself flow with the ups and downs of motherhood and immersing myself completely in what it means to be a parent. And I remember that on one of your social media on TikTok, you stitched a video of this whole like conversation of what people say when you catch up with someone and they're like, oh, how are you, et cetera, and you're like, oh, my kid this, my kid that, and motherhood this, and they're like, oh no, how are you, right? And we were talking about that, like of this idea of what it means to be more than a mother. And the reason why I'm so existential is because sometimes I'm totally okay. I even want to just talk about motherhood, you know, to just talk about my experience and my little one and what I'm going through and what I'm learning. And the reason why I think about this question a lot is because I think I've been told through society or the media that that's not okay. That it's not okay to just be a mother. And I'm not just a mother, right? But I think right now, because it's so new, that's what's operating and that's what I'm thinking about. That's what I'm reflecting on. That's what I'm consuming in my social media and what I'm reading, what I'm watching and stuff. So I'm okay with it. And I remember when you first launched your podcast, your whole first episode, I was like, this is literally why I'm in therapy. Of figuring out what's my identity as a mother. Because I'm so okay with being a mother. But even my therapist was like, well, you're more than that. Let's think about what's more. But I kept I kept thinking about, but I'm at this moment,
Yeah.
that's fine with me. Right. But I know the
Mm.
flip side of that can become, can lead to burnout or can lead to feeling unfulfilled. And so that's the other part of my existentialness of like, oh, maybe that's not the best. Maybe I do need to, branch out or do X, Y, and Z or talk about other things, prioritize myself, whatever that means. So sometimes I also feel like I embody Marianismo, and that scares
Mm.
me. Sometimes I feel like I'm being a martyr in motherhood and that I'm only, you know, sacrificing myself for my child. So I flip flop between all of these existential crises and always thinking about what does it mean to be a parent right now for me.
Yeah. You know what? I'm absorbing everything that you said because it was just like kind of sitting with me. And what's wrong with just wanting to be a mother? Right? Like, why is that such a horrible thing? And it's just so crazy because it's such a radical act of, I guess, changing the narrative to say, I want to be okay with just this. Despite everything that everybody's telling me and saying that, well, I need to do more of this or I need to do more of this, like just saying, you know what, I'm going to trust my gut, my intuition, and say, you know what, this is what feels right to me, you know?
Yeah. And part of me feels like that's my way of resisting because for so
Yes.
long, my life has been around like the movement, around like degrees. And you've talked about, your experience in corporate America, but like me of like thinking about what does it mean to move up in a nonprofit or have more responsibility or have all these things. And for so long, I feel like those things have tied into capitalism, into hustle culture, into wanting to achieve and meritocracy and all these things. And now I'm like, I don't find fulfillment in being promoted or, having all these accolades of that we think is what we should strive for. Like what brings me joy is in the everyday life, like the really simple like moments of joy. And that's what brings me so much happiness. So
Yeah.
in a way, again, I'm like, I'm okay with feeling like, what did I do today? I hung out with my little one.
Yeah.
And that's when we catch up. It's like when I catch up with a friend and I'm like, yeah, like my little one is eating this or doing this or throwing this. And like, that makes me happy.
Yeah. That's awesome. I love to hear that. You are an amazing mother. I know
Thank you.
that. I know that for a fact. I don't even have to see you with your son interacting. I can just that definitely comes off of whatever content you create when you speak in your podcast, how you're speaking now about becoming a mother. I think that's just so amazing.
Thank you.
And, you know, you mentioned earlier what you were saying about your therapist saying, well, what about this? And what about that? I know that recently you had said you kind of had to take a step back from therapy. And I wanted to have you share a little bit more about that because I feel like there are probably a lot of people that maybe have had a similar experience in therapy and just feeling like I cannot find a therapist that understands me, that like respects me, that, is willing just to step back and like allow me to process instead of trying to, invalidate me or tell me what I should or should not be doing kind of thing. So tell me a little bit more what kind of went on there for you.
Yeah. And to begin, I started the therapy journey because even though I feel like sometimes I can, feel and seem very confident, I also struggle a lot, obviously, with motherhood. And I struggle,
Yeah.
I'm super anxious. I struggle a lot with being alone with my little one, with going on a walk or going to the park or doing all these things. I struggle with that a lot. And so
Yeah.
I started my therapy journey because I wanted to unpack that and like find coping strategies to deal with that, to feel more at ease and confident and just like grounded, because that's a whole nother story. But I have been and still working on being like super anxious. So that's why I wanted to step into therapy. But I think that in terms of like the big picture, this whole journey of finding the right therapist for you, I went through just two, well, three, because in the postpartum period, I had a therapist. That one I knew from the jump was not good for me. It was not a fit for me. And the following two, I felt like I was trying to find a good fit. So I went through 3 therapists, and I think that in that journey, I started to like internalize, is there something wrong with me that I can't find a good therapist? So then I was like, I don't want to keep doing this to myself. I'm trying to heal. And in this process, I'm feeling, I forget if you cuss on the podcast.
Oh, yes, please.
Okay. I'm feeling shitty because I'm feeling like I can't, it's my fault. Why am I bothered that my therapist is texting during our session? You know,
oh, hell no.
why
No, she did not.
Oh my God. Again, like everyone's like, no, that's not okay. They shouldn't be doing that. But then the fact that it keeps happening, I'm like, well, is it me? Am I the issue that I'm being like nitpicky, right? But the first therapist I felt like was pushing me and would just go on like a soapbox kind of. Like I would say I'm struggling with this with motherhood, and then I wanted to unpack it, like have her ask me, oh, why, or where do you think it comes from? Or like, when does it happen? And she would just like hear me talk about something, and then she would just talk and talk and talk about like theoreticals, or like, yeah, that's how family is, like almost like lecture-y, like a lecture, like, yeah, family, sometimes we have to set boundaries because one time I remember this and that and this and that and this and that. So I feel like I would have been friends with that first therapist. Like I feel like we would have had a good friendship, but I don't think in the therapy capacity that was the most helpful for me. So that's like in the theories. And then logistical, she had like canceled twice on me without telling me first, those things. And I was like, is it my fault that I'm bothered by this? So then I was like, ugh, but I was like, let me try again. And then my second therapist, which I'm still like, I don't know how to feel about stepping back, but I feel lighter. And that's just like, I felt like I shouldn't feel bogged down, I was like counting down like for therapy to end. And it wasn't because I was being challenged. I was just like, ugh, why am I here? And in that sense, I think that my second therapist had a lot of good strategies for like dealing with it every day. And like, I think my second therapist had the mental health down, like those aspects of it. But I think for me, as you can tell from my background, I need to talk about like capitalism and how that affects me in my real life. Like I need to talk about colonization and intergenerational trauma and how that came up for me in the postpartum period. And so I think having someone that didn't have that analysis just didn't align well with me. But I think the last piece was that I was sharing, you're going to love this. I was sharing how there's some family dynamics that have made me kind of step away from my extended family. And there are certain individuals that I feel like we just don't align. I just don't align with. I don't want them around my little one, that kind of thing, right? And I was saying how there are family members that I do align with, but if the rest of the family is there, I don't feel called to go, and I just don't go to things. And she was like, well, if you think about it, that's kind of childish. And I was like, I was like,
oh my gosh.
I was like, oh. And she was like, yeah, it's almost as if I were to say that I don't take on clients that are teachers, that I just don't work with them. And I was like, I don't think that's the same. But, I was like, well, she's a therapist. So I'm like, yeah, I guess. And then after that, I started feeling a little bit like, damn, am I childish? And I started, so again, questioning all these things. And so at some point I was like, you know what? I'm gonna step back from now. I'm gonna step back.
I do not blame you at all. That's awful.
What you told me when you're like, sometimes the healing happens outside of therapy, just brought me so much peace, because I was like, am I giving up on myself and my little one by not, choosing to go this route? But when you said that, and thinking about like, your digital workbook and the coaching you might be doing in the future, I was like, yeah, I can still engage in this healing without putting myself in these situations where I feel unsupported.
Absolutely. I'm so sorry that happened. That's awful. That is like my blood is like boiling as you're telling me this. Like, are you kidding me right now? Like,
and then, everybody says like, oh, therapists are trained to hear feedback, and therapists are like, they know how to take feedback if you give them. But I'm like, I don't want to give feedback. I just like, I don't know. I don't have the energy for that.
Yeah. And here's the thing is that, like, I think, like you said, there's too many therapists out there that aren't well-rounded in that sense of, like, understanding how, like, the systems and society, like patriarchy and capitalism and institutionalized racism and generational trauma that is relative to, your specific culture. You know what I'm saying? Like, being Latina, there's a certain kind of, like, enmeshment that happens that's normalized. Like, your identity is tied to that of the family. And if you separate yourself from that, well, like, what's wrong with you? Like, family is forever, family is everything. No, at this point in your life, like, if you're trying to heal, if someone makes you feel some type of way, all that's doing is it's opening up and deepening those wounds that you're just trying to heal, right? Like, you imagine if you have a wound and it starts to scab, that's part of the healing process, right? But every time you lift that scab, it makes that process harder. So it's like every time you get around someone that just makes you, like, disturbs your peace, if I can put it plainly, it's like ripping off the scab, and that's just lengthening the amount of time that it takes to heal that wound. So you are absolutely not childish for doing that and feeling that way, because I can tell you, I feel like we're seeing more and more, like, first gen Latina people that are like, yeah, this shit is not okay, what's going on in my family, and I need to separate myself from it. A really, really, you probably follow this page, I don't know, but I think it's a Latinx therapy on Instagram. I love so much
Yeah,
of the stuff that she
so
posted.
much.
If I could get her on the page or on the podcast one day, that'd be amazing. But
Oh my God, yes. Yes.
but yeah, so much of it's like challenging the cultural norms. But you are absolutely valid in the way that you felt about those things, and you are absolutely valid for feeling like therapy wasn't working for you, because clearly it wasn't. And I can just personally tell you that I was lucky enough to get a therapist that, like, was very understanding and didn't do those things. However, I can say that just from experience, I did a lot of work outside of therapy. So when I got into therapy, a lot of it was just like me kind of telling her, like, I did this and then, or this happened and this is how I responded to it. And it was just kind of her being like, yeah, that was great. Yeah, keep doing that. So it wasn't really like I had to unpack a lot of things with her. My first therapist, because when I first got into therapy, she was this really sweet lady. It was all virtual. She was in, like, a different part of the country. And one time it was just out of the blue. She just kind of like, she was like, it was around Christmas time. I had shared something really difficult with her about my family dynamic. And it was just kind of like, yeah, you need to address that. And so she was kind of helpful in that way. But then, like, after I told her that, it was like she just, like, ghosted me. And I was like,
What?
okay, I guess, like, and it took me a while to want to go back to therapy after that, because I was just like, it's a lot of work to find a therapist. First, you got to make sure, like, one, whether or not you have insurance, you got to consider the cost and whether or not that's even something you can afford, because it's not cheap. And then trying to find somebody that's covered in your network, like, it's just, there's a lot of stuff to consider. So, like, I can tell you that having to, like, step back and do my own work and, like, reflect on my own childhood and, like, work through those things and feel the feelings, like, healing looks different for everybody. You know what I mean? And your healing journey is your own. And so I'm proud of you for recognizing that, like, it just wasn't working for you, instead of trying to make it work. And, like,
Yeah.
it's not your fault. It's not you. It was never you. The issues that you faced. That was entirely the people that you were working with, the therapists that you dealt with. So I hope that's.
Thank you. I still, I flip flop between, like, beating myself up about it and then feeling like it was the right decision. And, maybe I will go back. Maybe, but maybe not soon. And that's okay.
Hey, and exactly. That's totally fine. You got to find what works for you, whether it's, just, like, reading up on different books, or this one right here. Like, I don't know if you can see it right here. This one right here. How to do the work. Great stuff. The thing is about it, she has a lot of exercises in that book that actually force you to really reflect on your childhood and things that you experienced, that I felt like were really helpful. But I don't know that she really covered. She does have a chapter of it, but she doesn't really cover how your like cultural experience can play into that too. So I think that's something that's maybe that's kind of lacking from that book. But I know that there's books out there that do consider that. So I have to kind of research a little bit more and figure out like what books are good out there that could kind of help other people.
Yeah, me too. So, and me too. I want to do the research and the labor as well, because I don't want to feel like the healing is put on pause. It just looks different for now.
Yeah, exactly. So I wanted to kind of touch a little bit on like your experience with becoming an educator and ending up leaving teaching, because I feel like I've seen a pretty big movement of teachers leaving the education system for just a number of reasons. So I wanted to know kind of what was your experience with that. I'm curious.
Man, I thought I was going to be a career teacher. Like, I really thought I was going to be a teacher forever, retire, like all of the things. And two big things I think happened. Obviously, one was the pandemic. So my first year of teaching was 2019 to 2020. So it ended, when we went on lockdown in March. And so that was my first year. My second year was all virtual. My third year I was on maternity leave, and then I came back. And then my fourth year, I taught the whole year. So I taught for 4 years. And I think that becoming a mother, honestly, I don't know how teachers can be teachers and also be parents. Like, that was the biggest struggle for me. And I want to own the fact that I feel like I was a really good teacher, honestly. Like, I feel like I was reflective and I was intentional of like being culturally responsive, of having like restorative practices, of not being punitive, of not replicating harmful structures in my classroom dynamic, of thinking about lessons that were culturally relevant. And I was teaching ethnic studies. So I was helping students challenge these internalized ideas, these isms and phobias. So to be a good teacher, I feel like 90% of the job is done outside of Monday through Friday from 8 to 3. If you want to be a good teacher, like, you have to do the work in the evening and the weekends, over the summer, on the breaks, to like find those lessons, to think about assessments, to grade, to do all of these things. So it's like, I felt like I wasn't being the best teacher that I could be, that I know I could be, that I had been in the past. And at the same time, I wasn't feeling like I was being the parent that I wanted to be, because I would come home and I was exhausted physically and sometimes emotionally, because imagine having those conversations every day of the isms and the phobias and the internalized every single day and the pushback. But that was, that's the job. That's what I wanted to do. But that can also be exhausting, super exhausting to have those conversations every day with young people. I was teaching high school, ninth grade. And so I was coming home super tired. And on the weekends, I would try to figure out like windows of when I could work. So if I made a rule, okay, if my baby's napping, that's when I'll lesson plan. That's it. If my baby went down for bedtime, that's when I'll do the work. But it was just so exhausting and I think unsustainable. And everybody talks about the breaks. Like, you have summer break, you have this job, this profession that gives you breaks like none other. But sometimes so much of those breaks are spent recuperating. Like, just trying to get back to baseline that they're not even worth it. That it's just feeling like, it's not worth the struggle that happens year round. And even I think the second aspect of being a parent is like, you need flexibility. Sometimes little ones get sick. Sometimes you need to take them to the doctor's appointment. The first doctor's appointment that I missed because I had to work, I was so devastated. Like, I was so sad. And I was just like, I feel like I don't want to be in a job where I have to miss something.
Or you have to choose your job over your kids.
Exactly. And I feel like my parents, I mean, here comes the childhood trauma. But I feel like my parents being being immigrants, they had to have jobs where they were there all the time. They didn't have the flexibility. PTO, right? Like they're still exploited to this day, working very like labor intensive jobs. So I didn't want that. Not that teaching is like considered the same thing as labor intensive, but you just don't have the flexibility. And with the teacher shortage and the sub shortage, when you do miss, you're covered, right? You're legally, you have your sick days and all these things, but you're made to feel like bad, because now you're burdening other teachers that have to sacrifice their free hour or whatever to cover your class.
Yeah.
So even though you're told like take the time you need, and if you're a parent, if your little one's sick, you have to take a sick day, et cetera, but you're made to feel bad, and you're at the same time burdening the other teachers, and then that leads to their burnout and their absent, and you have to cover. So I just felt like it was just an unsustainable cycle that I didn't want to be a part of anymore.
Yeah.
And so I had to make that decision after 3.5 years doing community organizing, and then 4 years teaching, of like stepping away from being so student facing, I think. Because, the other thing, once I became a parent, I was more hypersensitive to like the emotional state of my students and how their parent dynamics affected them. That I was carrying that too.
Oh, so I can imagine that's super triggering, because it's just like bringing you back to that space, and like your body recognizes that. So it's like, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, like just seeing people that, wish they could spend more time with their parents, or having parents that are very unsupportive or just work a lot or whatever. And then seeing how that affected them, and then me feeling like it just made it weighed on me. It weighed on me a lot.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
And then coming back home and having already been so emotionally drained, and just like, and then coming back and like you feel like you're giving your kid almost kind of like leftovers, and it's like between both ends, it's like, well, if I don't give 100% to my students, I feel like I'm letting them down, like I'm failing them. And the same goes for my son, like if I'm not giving him 110%, like I feel like I'm failing him as a parent, and I'm not doing right by him. And it's like, you just feel like you can't win.
Right. And not to mention like household chores or whatever, because recently saw this post that like motherhood is not household chores, but it's often conflated and intertwined. And so if your house is a mess, that makes you somewhat less of a parent, or like less of a good parent. So not to mention all that, because that's a whole nother conversation, but just in my ability to show up with my little one and feel like I had the energy to play or go on a walk and stuff like that, it was like, I don't want this.
Yeah. And I know you were saying that you have taken some time just to kind of be at home with him. And what are you thinking is going to be your next step? Like, are you thinking you want to try and like go out and just kind of focus on possibly being an entrepreneur, or just like taking a whole different career shift when it comes to work? Or
I think right now it's like finding something that's flexible. So either hybrid or work from home, something that just allows me, that's just more parent friendly, that allows me to have that flexibility. Honestly, that's like what I'm thinking about the most. But I am, actively searching. I wish I could, stay home a little bit longer, but finances and capitalism. So I have to find a place
capitalism.
But I just want flexibility. I think that's my thing.
I think more and more people are starting to wake up to the reality that this hustle culture and the demands that capitalism has placed on us it's unsustainable. It's not human. Like, it's not in our nature. And, the fact is, the pandemic really, I think, opened up our eyes, a lot of us, to that reality. And, it's just, it's hard. It's hard, trying to balance that. And earlier when we were talking about, you being a mother and just being okay with just doing that, it reminded me of this podcast that I was listening to called Talking Body, which specifically was like about like women and their relationships with their bodies, and, just different type of body dysmorphia. But one thing that she said in that podcast, she said, we live in this world that's telling us that we have to do this and we have to be this and we have to accomplish all these things as women, as if being a mother, just being a mother, is not already the most important job in the world, because it is.
It really is.
It's so important.
Yeah.
It's like, speaking of, just being a mother and how important that is, I want to talk to you a little bit more about being a mother to boys, because I have a son. You have a son. I also have a daughter, but specifically our sons. Tell me, what are ways that you're trying to raise him differently to, I guess, kind of change the narrative, if I could put it simply? What are some things that you want to instill in him?
Yeah. And I can't think about that conversation without thinking about like how lucky I am to have a partner, a husband that's like really intentional about like rejecting ideas of toxic masculinity, who's someone that's very open to like sexuality, thinking about sexuality with how we raise our little one, thinking about gender identity and how we raise our little one, and like being open to the many identities that our little one might have growing up, So in that way, it's like I feel so just lucky that I have a partner that we share. We met, we were both doing that work of like working with young people against the school to prison pipeline. So we shared those values even before becoming parents. But
Yeah.
I think when we think about raising little boys right now, and especially I think little boys and kids of color,
Yes.
it's like, how do we reject these ideas, these harmful ideas of masculinity, these harmful ideas of how society criminalizes young people, young men of color? I think for us, it's like there's multiple ways. One is like raising Ali to understand identity, understand his identity, understand the ways in which identity can change, the ways like there are different identities. That's like the one. Two is like the emotional aspect of it, right? This annoying idea of like, oh, boys don't cry, or toughen up, you're a boy, right? Like how all of those things are super harmful. And so in being able to raise him to be in tune with his emotions, to understand that like your emotions are your superpowers, and like home is always going to be a safe space for you, like no matter what. It's like that's our biggest thing.
Yeah.
And then it's like for us being super flexible with, at this stage, because he's 2, he's still little, but being flexible with like all these things that people swear by can affect a child's identity in the future. But like he's gonna wear whatever he wants. If he wants to wear pink, he's gonna wear pink. If he wants to play with a Barbie, he's gonna play with a Barbie. Like,
Yeah.
we are by no means going to follow these rigid ideas of gender, right? And I think that that comes at odds sometimes with family, that don't want to see that or make little comments like, oh, why does he have a pink blanket or whatever? It's like, do I want to go into this? Do I want to go into this right now?
Yeah.
Or do I just want to shrug it off like,
Yeah.
But I think for us, it's like when we think about the personal is political, the revolution starts at home. It's like, how do we raise a little one that is in tune with his emotions, that understands his identity, that feels safe to explore all these aspects of one's livelihood, and just to know that we want to model and raise the type of person that we want to see in society, someone that can regulate their emotions, someone that can be a great partner, someone that can be just a great person, that understands justice, that, can recognize oppression. And so also we have to think about race, right? My husband's Black, so my little one is biracial. What are those dynamics in a non-Black Latina family, right? How do we raise him to be proud of his Blackness, but also at the same time, we want him to speak Spanish. So it's like, we think about all these things, we consider all of these things. What kind of schools might we send him to that he can see himself represented, right? That we figure out, and we are very, attuned and mindful of how anti-Blackness shows up in society, in certain communities. So all of these things that we're constantly thinking about.
Yeah.
But I think that whole pressure of like, boys will be boys, or boys don't cry, or boys should play with this. It's like, from the get-go, we were just not about that life. Like, and it's hard. I
It
think it's
is.
hard. I think
Yeah.
being pregnant and experiencing this, you notice how gender norms are pushed onto you
Oh my
from
gosh.
the beginning.
Yeah.
Like when you tell someone, like we didn't really share the gender much when we found out the sex of the baby, but even at the hospital, it's like, oh, what are you having? Okay. Oh, well, be careful with boys because this and that, or boys are gonna run around so much. You're gonna be so tired, or like all these things. It's like enforced, you know, the blue for boy. It's like a current that's
Mm.
like pushing down on you. And if you're trying to raise a little one different or do things differently, you're like constantly having to push back that current, and it's exhausting.
It is.
It's hard. It's
Yeah.
hard. So at some point we're like, you know what? We're not going to feel the need to explain ourselves so much to people, but we know what we're going to do in our house.
Yeah.
Because I can imagine if you running into someone and they want to have all these opinions on how you're raising your son too. It's like, do I want to explain and spend all that energy, or do I just want to raise him how I want to raise him?
Right. Yeah. I know it's and the thing is too is like, you know, it's almost like the people pleaser in you, especially if you know you're raised to, many of us were raised with the same parenting method, right? The authoritarian, you respect authority, you know, obedience, etc. Like the people pleaser in you, it's literally more emotionally draining than I think some people understand, to try and like fight against or like really pretty much like defend your choices, right? Like so you come in contact with family and like they're telling you like, why is your son acting like that, or why you let your son do this, et cetera, et cetera. And like even just like challenging their mindset, it literally, like I can't tell you how like scary that feeling is. I'm sure you know, like I don't have to tell you, you know. It's that much more emotionally draining and exhausting to have to deal with that conflict, especially when you haven't healed, or you're like, you know, still in the early stages of healing and getting over that people pleaser syndrome. And so it's like, well, I just don't even want to deal with that. Right. Like, and some people don't understand that and they won't. And, you know, it's not your job to explain that to them. All your job is to ensure that you're taking care of you, you're taking care of your son. And a time will come, I promise you this, a time will come when you feel so deeply rooted in your values and you don't question yourself and you don't give a damn what anybody has to say, that when that time comes, because it will eventually again, that someone challenges you, you're going to be able to look at them dead in the eye and call them on their bullshit and say, you know what, this isn't okay. But you know what? It's okay to not be there yet. It's okay. It doesn't make you like bad or like that you're not you know, standing up for what's right. It's just, that's just where you're at. And it's like you gotta give yourself some grace in that too, you know?
Thank you. Because then the flip side of that is like, well, if you don't say anything, then you're like, I should have, I could have, I would have.
And then you ruminate on
I should
it
have
for
said
like
this. Yeah, you're
ever.
ruminating.
Oh, trust me.
Yes. Yes. And also like a quick note on like social media. I feel like on social media, I'm like, yeah, like don't let nobody tell you this. And you know, you're confident in your choices. And then in real life, I'm like,
Well, I'm just gonna stay quiet.
yeah, they keep asking me this. Like, you know, recently I'm still breastfeeding. My little one just turned 2. And that question has come up a lot. Like, when are you gonna stop? When are you gonna stop? Right. And on social media and like on Reddit, there's all this like support of like, oh, people shouldn't ask you. I'm like, yeah, they shouldn't. And then someone asks me and I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah,
like,
it's so different when you're in the moment, you know?
Yeah.
It's scary. But hey, it's okay to feel that way. It's normal. It takes work. Like you gotta think about it too. Like we're close to the same age. We're what, in our 30s? Are you in your 30s already? Yeah. And so we have close to more than half of our life, like 2/3 of our life of conditioning that we have to undo. And so it's like we can't expect to undo that 20 plus years of conditioning in a matter of a couple of years. It just doesn't happen like that. You know, it's going
Yeah.
to take a lot of work, a lot of consistency, but you know, you just got to take it one day at a time, you know,
Yeah. And
one step
honestly,
at a time.
I don't know if you feel the same, but I feel like becoming a parent has motivated me to, step into that healing so much more, because I see my little one and he's just like this little vessel, and you have all the power of instilling joy and dealing with like the development and the tantrums and being able to like curate as best as possible like an upbringing of happiness and wellness, and
Mm.
so when I see that, when I first started thinking about that, it's like, dang, there's so much I want to change and so much I want to work on and so much I want to unpack. And that's why I love your tagline, like, you're healing so your kids won't have to. It's like,
Oh yeah,
yes,
I updated that too, but
oh
I
yeah,
maybe I gotta change it back because I'm trying to like strategize my social media. But somebody else told me that same thing. Like I love that healing, so my kids don't have to, because it's 100% true.
yeah.
You know. So, oh man, let me see. Where are we? I think we're going on an hour, but this
Oh my
conversation
gosh,
has
really?
just been so. Yeah, we're getting close to it. That's okay. That's okay.
Yes, yes.
Because this conversation has just been so. I knew that this was probably gonna like that. Our conversation was just gonna flow like this because we just share so many similar values
Yeah.
and things of that nature. So, I wanted to close it out with this final question, and that is, what is one thing you hope that your son learns from watching you, from observing you in life?
Hmm. I heard you ask your previous guest this,
Oh,
and I
so
was
you
like,
know
"Oh
what
my
the question is.
gosh." I was like, "I hope she doesn't ask me this." It's hard. There's so many things. I think I want my little one to be like confident in himself and his decisions and his emotions,
Hmm.
and know that, his feelings are valid, that his decisions are valid, and that he doesn't have to, think about pleasing and worrying about others and explaining himself to others. Like, I
Hmm.
want to model that, so
Yeah.
that when he grows up, he can also embody that. And I
Hmm.
think that in terms of like the bigger picture, I would love for him to just, grow up with the values of understanding, again, justice, understanding like our history as marginalized people, and taking that, for whatever he wants, right? If he wants to pursue a career that, revolves around that, then good. And if he doesn't, then good.
Hmm.
I think I don't want to put the pressure on him of like, you have to do this, you have to do that. It's like, I'm excited to see what kind of things he explores in his likes and his interests. And that's what I'm excited to see and hope to model that in what he sees in me and from me.
Yeah. And I think you will. I think you're already showing that. You're already just this conversation. It's you got it. You're doing the work. You're doing
Thank you.
it. So give
Thank you.
yourself
It's
some
hard.
credit. It
Thank you.
is.
It's
It's
hard.
hard. But you're doing it. So I'm proud of you.
Thank you.
Oh. Well, this was fun. You can so to the listeners, you can find Diana's podcast Parenting Plus on pretty much all the platforms like Spotify, Apple. Do you guys have it on YouTube or no?
No,
No, not on YouTube.
no.
But you can follow them on social media. It's just Parenting Plus or Parenting Plus podcast. I can't remember off the top of my head.
Parenting Plus podcast.
The
Yeah.
or no, the like your what's that called? Your handle on social media.
Yeah. Parenting Plus podcast.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
I'll be sure to link it in the description. But yeah, like I said, your podcast is so much fun, and I just love the dynamic between you and Paul. It's just you can tell you guys not only obviously you guys love each other and you're together, but it's like you can tell there's almost like kind of a friendship dynamic that you guys have, and I think that's so essential for like doing life with a person, is having that,
Yeah.
you can just sit there and laugh and talk like friends. I love that for you.
Thank you. Thank you.
But yeah, you can find Diana on all social media platforms, TikTok, Instagram, and of course on podcast streaming platforms. So until next time, we'll connect on social media, of course, as always. But thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And it was such a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you for being you, because I've told you this. I told you at the beginning, like, seeing people like you gives me hope, finding that like virtual support or community of parents that align with you, because sometimes you don't have that in your everyday life. So thank you for your content.
Thank you. And thank you to you too. Same thing. Support, everything. I love that we have shared values. So that's so important. We'll
Thank
talk
you.
again soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Mom's New Identity podcast is produced and edited by your host, Amber Ivana. Intro music, Madre Creator, is written and performed by Heidi Rojas of Heidi Rojas Music.